Order, order. Welcome to the meeting of the Speakers Committee for IPSA. We're here today to consider IPSA's main estimate for 24-25. Richard, Ian, could you introduce yourselves for the record?
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. I'm Richard Lloyd. I'm Chair of IPSA.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. I'm Ian Todd. I'm the Chief Executive of IPSA.
Excellent. Before we begin the question, could you briefly summarise your main estimate? Who wants it?
Certainly, thank you. And by the way, as this is almost certainly the last meeting of this committee before the general election, can I just thank you, Mr. Speaker, and every member of the committee for your guidance, your support, and your challenge as we've gone about transforming, rebuilding the foundations of IPSA, because that is what we have done. We've changed the culture of IPSA, we've transformed the service we provide, we've importantly maintained extremely high levels of compliance with our scheme. We've responded to the current security environment through the way we publish our data and through the way we provide transport. So the coming year is about building on the progress we've already made. Our core work continues in terms of funding the essential requirements to run a constituency office, staff, and ensure that that members can do their jobs. We are going to continue to improve our service, and we've set out alongside our estimate the ways we intend to do that through helping members to procure better offices with much more support for healthy and safe working environments in constituency offices, for continuing to fund staffing complements at the level that we provided over the last 2 years. In other words, an envelope that will pay for 5 staff, and provided the estimate is approved, we will apply a 6.2% automatic uplift to people's salaries next month. What, of course, we've also got to do is to deal with a general election, and thanks to the Administration Committee and its recommendations, we've been focused. In actual fact, for 3 years, we've been working on preparations for the election, making sure that we are able, in a much more realistic time frame, to help MPs that are leaving wind up their affairs, and also to bring on board new members and to ensure that they are as quickly as possible able to get up and running with our support. We're going to test, and at the appropriate time we're going to introduce a new user-friendly gateway to IPSA Online, which I know many members are interested in seeing us do. And we're going to fully review our rules, bringing about a principles-based approach that we've discussed with you before, with better guidance and more practical support where offices need it. So, in short, Mr. Speaker, we are going to build on the successes, on the foundations that we've laid over the last 3 years. I know this has been a particularly difficult time for many members and their staff, and I'm very grateful to Ian and all the staff at IPSA for doing all they can within our remit to provide appropriate and more sensitive support at this time. The feedback we've had is the highest ever level of satisfaction with our service, the highest ever level of staff engagement at IPSA, and the confidence to take those next steps in the evolution of what Parliament has asked us to do.
Thank you for that. And that hands me nicely over to Heather.
Lovely. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to see you. I personally hope that we'll see you again in December and then have a general election after that. But who knows?
The timing of skipsers are not in my hands, and general elections even less so.
Yeah, well, you and me both, kid. You and me both. Ian, I'd like to ask you, please, what is your assessment of your progress against your business plan, please?
Thank you, Heather. So, I think it's worth reflecting that our business plan for the current financial year, towards the end of which we're now approaching, is also the end of our corporate plan over 3 years, which was the one that I agreed with the board when I took over as Chief Executive. We've seen considerable progress over that time. You would expect me to say that, but I'd maybe give you some metrics to demonstrate that. And it is, I would like to pay tribute both to my own team within IPSA, but also to members and their staff who have engaged with us in a far more proactive way than we've been able to achieve previously to support us in the development of some of the products that we've been able to offer. Over the course of that corporate plan, our call answering performance has increased. We now answer 88% of phone calls within 20 seconds. Whilst there is no unique single industry standard, 80% in 20 seconds is one of the most commonly adopted in call centres. We've seen a 17% increase in the last year in email response performance. Complaints have dropped by over 2/3. Time taken to reimburse MPs has dropped by 2/3. Most importantly, our annual user satisfaction of members and their staff has seen a 40% increase in those rating our service as good or very good over the period of that corporate plan. It started at just 25% in 2019 on the back of the implementation of IPSA Online. It is now running at in excess of 65%. Similarly, the number of MPs who rate the service as poor has significantly decreased, with an increase in those rating us as neutral. Confidence in using IPSA Online has increased from 75% to in excess of 90% on the back of the road shows that we've been operating and the training and development we've been able to put in place for members, but particularly for their staff. The amount of time taken using IPSA Online has significantly decreased by members and their staff, freeing them up to concentrate on what really matters, that is dealing with the matters of your constituents rather than the administration involved with IPSA. It's encouraging to see as well that we have delivered all of that while seeing our own staff engagement improve from 51% in 2019 to 77% at the last assessment in 2023. If you were to compare that to the civil service as a whole, probably the closest public sector comparator, we are 12% ahead of where the rest of the civil service is. I think that those numbers over a 3-year period, including the work that we've done over the last 12 months, demonstrate a very positive direction of travel and demonstrate that we have met all of the objectives both of last year's last year's business plan and the 3-year corporate plan.
Thank you very much indeed.
Charles.
Well, I too, like Heather, hope we're here in December. But if not, can I say how much I've enjoyed working with the two of you in a professional capacity? It's been very constructive. Just a couple of questions. First of all, in setting MPs' pay for the coming financial year, what metrics are you going to use for that?
If you remember, in 2021, we consulted post-COVID, post the pandemic, on whether we should continue using the metric that had been in place for some years, that is, a measure that tracks the growth in public sector earnings over the previous 12 months. And because those metrics have been, to put it bluntly, a bit all over the place because of some of the effects of COVID and because of some of the economic circumstances we've seen over the last period, we consulted on taking that metric as a starting point, but looking at other indicators, including settlements in the real economy, including the whole economy, and in the public sector. So when we do announce the determination that we make independently for MPs' pay, we will follow that set of rules that we consulted on and introduced in 2021. For staff, this year again we have taken a metric that tracks earnings in public administration roles. That at the time we set the estimate, we drafted the estimate, is a 6.2% increase, and that's what we're proposing to introduce as the default for MPs that don't opt their staff out of the annual uprating. In terms of the budget, we're assuming, as I just mentioned, another year of a complement, an envelope that will fund 5 staff. And I should just say, Charles, that the next election, whenever that is, when the next Parliament is here, we will do a full review both of MPs' pay and the metrics that we use at the time for the next Parliament, and also of the right size for constituency offices. I've been in constituency offices many times recently, and I hear loud and clear that in some places there is serious stretch. There are other things, as Ian said, we can do to reduce the pressure, the stress, the strain on constituency staff. But I think after the next election, it will be the right time for us to step back and ensure that we are providing the right level of resourcing. As you'll remember, we did increase the complement by the equivalent of one full-time member of staff post-COVID. But there are many views about that, so we want to take our time and do that review properly.
So staff are getting 6.2%. When you intend to announce the pay award for members of Parliament, it's now March the 5th. The new financial year starts in just over 3 weeks.
You'll hear very soon. Again, one of the things I think you will have seen in our estimate and our plan for this year is how seriously we are taking our responsibility to promote trust in this institution, in democracy. So when we do announce, as we expect in the coming days, decisions that we've made independently that may be controversial, we will do our level best to contextualise that decision, to explain it, to ensure that there is the most proactive approach possible to explaining what we're doing and why.
So paying members of Parliament, I would say, is not controversial. Exactly, yeah. Because I'm not doing this job for free. I've never done anything for free, and I've never turned down a pay rise. And perhaps, I know you're doing it for the best of reasons, making such a big deal out of this actually suggests that members of Parliament shouldn't be getting pay rises or shouldn't be getting a salary for doing the job. And I'm not suggesting for a minute, but I can say this as I'm leaving Parliament. I don't want to get to a state where members of Parliament have to feel ashamed for being paid for turning up and doing a really difficult job. So I think the quicker, it's now March the 5th, the quicker we announce what members of Parliament are going to get paid, the better.
I very much agree, and were we doing this in February as planned, then we would have made that announcement now. By the way, one of our principles is absolutely that we should pay MPs a fair rate so that being a parliamentarian is open to anyone, whatever their circumstances. It has to be fair to the taxpayer as well. My point merely is that every year we know that there are a minority of people who object to an increase or a decrease or nothing at all. And therefore it's incumbent on us as the independent determiners of MPs' pay to explain properly, publicly, the rationale for our decision, and that's what we'll do.
Right. Boundaried out members of Parliament, I think we have to, I know you're looking at it, but there's been a major boundary review. There are going to be some members of Parliament who, through no fault of their own, are not going to fight a seat to stand in. And what we don't want to do is a situation where members of Parliament who are boundaried out stand as sort of paper candidates in seats to secure a redundancy payment. Is the SCIPSA board alive to that concern?
We've looked very carefully, as you know, following your committee's very helpful recommendations, your report. We've looked very carefully at the support we provide to anyone who's winding up as a result of leaving Parliament. The rule, as you know, up to now has been that some of the funding available is triggered by losing a seat, and that's where the unintended consequence you described might arise. We've also looked very carefully at the impact of the boundary changes and where those are significant, the additional support we will need to provide to people moving, for example, their constituency office. So we are very alive to the issue in the round. On the specific of whether individual members choose not to stand again purely and solely because of a boundary change, that's one we're going to have to come back to you on, because I think disentangling the motivations for not standing isn't as straightforward as it might sound, but the point is well taken.
So in conclusion, I'm sorry if I sounded fierce on MP's pay. I would just like to say again, for the record, the two of you have been a breath of fresh air, and we've had lots of honest conversations, and for the sake of anybody watching this, I very rarely get my own way, but occasionally I do. So it's a bit of give and take, so thank you very much.
Thank you for saying that, and I didn't think you were as fierce as I know you can be, Charles.
Yeah, quite.
Right, Marion.
All of that. Sorry, gentlemen, it's really nice to see you here again. I want to talk about office budget costs. As you know, this year, the beginning of this year, they went up by 7%, proposal for 8%, and the Chief Secretary of the Treasury is the revised one seems to suggest that government department would have been expected to absorb much more costs under business as usual. So why, I mean, I'm not for one moment saying don't, please, and I don't think there's anyone else around the table who would, because why is it going up this year then? If it wasn't all used, all the increase wasn't all used last year.
Well, I'll start and then I'll hand over to Ian. What we do year in, year out is assess the evidence of what's happening in the market and what it costs. Our duty given to us by Parliament is to ensure that MPs can carry out their parliamentary duties. One of those is to have an office in their constituents, and the cost of that we meet based on real-world evidence. On the whether we should behave like a multi-billion-pound government department, I'm sure Ian's got a view.
Well, thank you, Richard. So, having worked in multi-million-pound government departments, I can say that I think there are distinct differences, and the letter from the Chief Secretary of the Treasury maybe doesn't reflect that as we would like. The money is not flowing. IPSA is not an organisation that employs 4,500 people and deals with £250 million a year. That money flows through us, but it is delegated to 650 individual MPs who have small budgets with which they run their constituency offices. The idea, therefore, that you can absorb those costs in the way that you could if you were an organisation of several thousand people and £250 million is not a viable one. The office cost budget has been thought through very carefully. It does show an 8% rise for next year. That reflects the rental costs of offices, which we know are disproportionately high. It includes the utility costs within those offices, which we know are disproportionately high. There is also a differentiation between the amount of money that is going into individual MPs' budgets and the headline figure that is in the estimate. They are not the same thing. One is not 650 times the other. We recognise that many MPs underspend on various lines of their budget, and we reflect the headline figure in the estimate to take into account the historic underspends that many members return. So the increase that you see in your budget is not the same as the increase. In fact, given that most of the lines of members' budgets increase by between 6 and 9% next year, the overall estimate only increases by under 4% because we top slice out the underspends that we know will take place. To reflect a point that Peter has made, and in fact Sir Desmond on previous occasions, we are also getting far better at forecasting with a greater degree of accuracy. We think that the forecast underspend against subhead A is likely to be just over 3% by the end of this year, which is far better than it has ever been previously. The subhead B, which is IPSA's own operating costs, are forecast to be 1.5% under budget, which is around about 150,000 on a budget in excess of 10 million. So our forecasting becomes more accurate each year as well.
Peter.
So, Ian, you're on again. You are, IPSA's planning to keep 1% of subhead A departmental expenditure limit as a contingency. We think that's about 2.5 million of unallocated funding. So can you explain why? And why have you chosen to do it that way as opposed to come back for a supplemental estimate?
I can indeed explain that, Peter, and I think it's a misunderstanding, and I'm sorry if that's one that we have fostered in the way that we make our submission via the Treasury. This is not a contingency budget in the way that one would normally expect. So a normal contingency budget would be one by which, having exhausted all of the other monies that have been given to us, we then dip into that contingency at the end. The contingency budget is the budget specifically that funds contingency applications from members to IPSA. The contingency budget is there for two things. It funds things which are not normally available under the scheme, but which on an exceptional basis should be granted because there are compelling reasons why that should be the case. And it also reflects costs that we know some MPs will incur, but we don't know which MPs and how much at the beginning of the year. So they are not allocated to budgets, but they are things which are legitimate one-off costs. So an example might be legal support for HR issues. Where they are not within a member's budget, then they would apply through the contingency route. So this contingency budget funds that contingency process. It is not a contingency in the normal sense, because they may be underspent and will be underspent on other areas of their budget.
So would you expect this to be a recurring feature then in future estimates?
It is and historically has always been. It is the funding for the contingency process. It is not a traditional contingency figure. It is not a figure we will dip into having exhausted all of the funds. It's a different mechanism.
Maybe moving forward we could indicate that in a different way. Maybe that would be a better
Indeed, and as I said at the beginning, if we have presented that to the Treasury in a way that has led them down a particular path, then we need to explain ourselves better in future. Having said that, this is a traditional feature of our estimate and has not caused the concern previously, but we will address it in future years.
Right, so thank you for that. And in subhead B, well done, you've decreased your budgets in your core capital budget, so that's always pleasing to see. But you've decided to keep 120,000 in your capital contingency, so we've got contingency again, and that seems to be quite a high percentage of your core capital budget. It's about 85%. Can you speak to that, please?
I can. So that is a contingency in the traditional sense. I think we have a particular challenge, along with a number of other organisations that are overseen by Speakers' Committees, and that is that our budgeting process is incredibly early. We have to start producing our budgets in September to go through this process for a budget that starts in April and will run through to the following March. That does make it particularly difficult to predict some of the outcomes. We're undertaking, for example, a lot of work at the moment around a new interface front end for IPSA Online. We have done a lot of engagement with members and their staff about what that solution should look like. We then have a range of options. We need to go to the market. We need to understand what can be delivered at what cost through a competitive procurement process. The difficulty is trying to estimate what that's going to be in September when we're not going to be procuring it until into the following financial year is very difficult. So we have given our best estimate within the figures provided, but we have retained a degree of contingency there because we need to fully understand the scope of what we're going to deliver, and at the time of providing the estimate we could not do so any more accurately than we have done.
Thank you.
Lucy. Then Teresa.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I just also echo what Sir Charles said? I think this is my first SCIPSA meeting, but I've been in this role for a few months now, and the general feedback about the performance of IPSA amongst colleagues on my side of the House is completely transformatory from where it was 2 or 3 years ago. So, well done to you both on that, and more power to your elbow in doing that. And I'll also concur with what Sir Charles was saying about the other points he was making too, which is easy for him to make. I just want to raise a couple of things that actually aren't in your estimates. The first is about general election planning, which you mentioned at the beginning, Richard. Obviously, you said yourselves that your sort of estimated costs of managing the departure of one MP to be £116,000 when you take all those things into account. And I think the House of Commons Library has already produced, has got a tracking spreadsheet of those who said they're standing down. So notwithstanding any changes to a general election, that list is already at 100. So that's £10 million to start off with. So I just wondered why that wasn't in the estimates, given that we are in a general election year in that financial year, and when might you bring those forward? Because we could, in theory, be dissolving Parliament in two and a half weeks, in theory. Well, unlikely, but yeah.
I've already been a bit bold about whether this committee will meet again this year, so I'll be very careful what I say. I think the point about many MPs having already declared the standing down has been helpful to us in our planning. We've done numerous winding up sessions with MPs already, preparing them to help wind up their offices and the like. So we are ahead, well ahead, and better prepared than IPSA has ever been for a general election. And it is helpful that we've had those declarations early. We will inevitably have to do a supplementary estimate because that won't be the full size of it, one assumes. In the past, it's been our practice, and I think it remains sensible, to put in a supplementary estimate when we've got actual costs that we can put to the House, rather than projections or estimates based on some public and some private information that we get from MPs at this stage. In other words, we thought it was more straightforward to do a single supplementary rather than try and fold in what we might know now and might not be public now into the current estimate, but to do it all in one in a supplementary estimate. The other thing as well is that we will need to come back with a supplementary estimate for the costs of the McLeod remedy.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that. Yeah.
And therefore it seemed to us sensible to do both together again when we're closer to or have the actual costs.
Okay, so just I was going to mention McLeod, but you've mentioned that, and so that answers that sort of bit of the question. But just to be clear, that I mean, of course, in terms of MPs standing down or changing roles, you wouldn't be sure of that number until the day after a general election. But are you saying you'd come back with a supplementary before you think there's going to be a general, or you'll do it after? And have you got the money in the bank, as it were, to sort of do that before you've had a supplementary estimate
we can
agreed?
do what we need to do until we've got the actual costs.
Okay,
Yeah.
So it's a retrospective thing.
Supplementary estimate would be after the event. It's good for transparency as well, because it allows us to bundle all of the general election costs into one supplementary estimate, so that highlights that they are specific to that event rather than being conflated with the ongoing operating costs of MPs through the rest of the year. It's the way we've done it previously, and also although we can estimate the winding up costs for those MPs who we believe are standing down, they are not all of the costs of the winding up process. That is a specific element, and then there are all of the MPs who may turn over that we are unaware of, subject to the will of the electorate. So it just makes a much simpler, more transparent process to do a post hoc supplementary estimate covering all of the costs.
And just finally, related to that, thank you to allowing me to be on the pilot scheme, because my boundary is changing. So as Charles was saying, I'm having to change office as well. So could you perhaps just say a bit about the sort of estimates around office changes that maybe sit outside of just the general election, but boundaries and other things, and how you're sort of supporting members with that now, and what costs are involved with that?
We're undertaking a pilot at the moment. We hope that we will be in a position to roll that out to at least all new members after the general election. That does depend a little bit on when the timing of the general election is. Obviously, the more preparation time we have, the more we will learn from the pilot scheme. So we recognise that members, when they take office, particularly for the first time, but also when they have to move offices, are not necessarily experts in property law. They have other things to be doing rather than searching for properties, for looking for utilities and doing all of the various things that sit alongside that. So we believe we can support members by moving the burden predominantly onto us. So we have entered an arrangement with a provider who will be able to search out appropriate properties. That means they'll be spec'd to the right standard. They will be suitable for the fitting of security arrangements. They will be accessible. They will meet the sort of minimum requirements that are necessary, and then provide a range of options to a member who can then choose from within those options. We hope in the fullness of time that will also include fully serviced packages, so that utilities and various other products can be bundled in with that. The pilot at the moment involves 17 members. We wouldn't expect it to be significantly higher at this stage because most MPs will not be looking to move office within relatively close proximity to a general election. We're very grateful to you and your team for being one of those pilot members. We're still in fairly early stages. I think it's fair to say.
Costs are in here, though, are they? Yeah, the costs are all accounted for as well.
The costs are all accounted for. Yeah, the overhead of the arrangement with the provider is not significant. We can't fully offset that yet, so there won't be. There will be a cashable saving in terms of the time of both you and your staff members for not having to undertake some of this activity yourselves in future, which would offset. Now, you don't see the financial benefit of that, but what you do have is the capacity to be dealing with other things.
Thank you.
Lisa.
Another question about the impact of the general election. Not so much about the money in pounds, shillings and pence terms, but in terms of the impact on your ability to manage the process. As everyone has already said, between you presided over a significant improvement in performance and service standards. This election will come and be perhaps a very disruptive time for you and your teams. So can you perhaps tell us a little bit about how you're sort of gearing up to manage that, both in terms of the MPs who'll be leaving because they wish to or because the electorate wishes them to, but also the new ones who'll be arriving without the experience and knowledge of the systems and the processes and who'll probably need a lot more support from your staff than perhaps the current MPs and their offices might need. So it's really in that sort of people and resource impact rather than money.
So I think in many ways you're right that a general election is a disruptive period of time for us. On the other hand, it is a foreseeable event and there is no excuse for not being ready for it. We're very grateful in particular to Sir Charles, the Administration Committee and their report on our performance at the last general election, which had some positives but also some challenges. We have been working for at least 3 years in preparation for the upcoming general election. We have worked very closely with the House to make sure that the appropriate arrangements are in place. We have dedicated arrangements for new members, for returning members and for departing members. That prioritises the particular information that they need from us and that we need from them. We have significantly enhanced training packages, both face-to-face and online, for example, for new members when they take office for the first time, so that we can support them in both getting up and running, renting offices, recruiting staff, as well as dealing with IPSA directly through the IPSA online system. We have already undertaken test events in relation to both new and departing members, where we've kind of run scenarios in the rooms that we will actually be using to ensure that process works effectively. It is a big call on our resource to be able to deal with that. I mean, effectively, where you have MPs who are winding up their offices and you have new offices, our cohort increases from 650 to potentially the best part of 1,000 MPs, depending on or 1,000 individuals, depending on the degree of turnover that happens at the next election. But we are confident that we have got a resourcing plan. We understand what activities we can stop, what activities we can slow down to be able to deliver that effectively. We are absolutely confident that we are well placed to deal with the election, and were Sir Charles here to have a report on the upcoming general election at some point in the future, I am very confident that he would be able to frame opposition far more positively than he was last time.
Thank you.
Desmond.
You've got an increase of 284,000 on consultancy. What are they for?
So I think it's absolutely normal for any organisation to rely on consultancy where you require specialist expertise. We're a small organisation. We only have 100 staff. We don't necessarily employ people in every specialist area. We don't have a call for them to be employed full-time on an ongoing basis. There are probably 3 areas where we have particular consultancy requirements relating to the transformation programme, and then another 2 in particular that relate to ongoing business as usual. So the constituency office proof of concept, the accommodation pilot that we've already talked about, requires some external specialist resource. The development of the IPSA online front end and marketplace tools also require external support. It's beyond our capability to be able to do that, and it would not be cost effective to employ someone in-house to be able to deliver that for us. And we also need to do some work around the new strategic pillar and supporting trust in democracy that Richard's already alluded to. So those are 3 particular new areas under the new corporate plan that we need to rely on some external resource for. The 2 business as usual kind of ongoing requirements are specialist cybersecurity, where it simply wouldn't be viable to employ that kind of expertise in-house on an ongoing basis. And we have had some support in the procurement and commercial space where we've been unable to recruit in the past, but we have now made progress in that direction, so I think that will be coming to an end. They are not I don't think that the consultancy budget is one that we would consider to be a one-off for this year. Some of it may roll over into subsequent years, but equally they are not ongoing commitments that will be unlimited in duration. They are things that are likely to last between 1 to 3 years at a maximum, I would suggest.
So to what extent will the consultants be agency staff, or will they be people that you will take on your own terms for a fixed term contract, or, God forbid, a firm of consultants who will borrow your watch to tell you the time?
Indeed, and I've been in that space once myself. So these are predominantly outsourced commercial arrangements. So we go through a full, proper, open procurement process to recruit companies. These are not consultants in the traditional sense. They are property experts around the accommodation pilot. It's provision of IT support in relation to the marketplace. So they are commercial arrangements with corporate entities, but for very specific sort of skill sets.
Could I just say to conclude, Richard and Ian, thank you for the constructive way that you have worked with us. I think we are light years from where we were. Thank you for that, and thank you for moving it in the right direction. It is appreciated. Right, that concludes our public session. Thank you both for joining us today. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.